Welcome back to the deep dive.
Yeah.
Today we are doing something, well, something a little bit different.
Yeah, a little unusual for us.
Right, because usually we take a topic and, sort of float around the concepts. But today we are getting our boots muddy.
Literally.
Literally. We are taking a map, a very specific, very messy, swampy, real-world map of southern Mexico. And we are laying a stack of ancient war chronicles right on top of it.
It is a really fascinating exercise because usually when people read history, and specifically religious history, like the Book of Mormon, they tend to picture it in a void.
Right.
Just generic wilderness or generic cities on a blank white page.
Exactly. It's like reading a fantasy novel without the map in the front cover. You just sort of imagine trees and castles.
But there is an actual landscape to consider.
Right. And today we're looking at a source titled War in Geography in Ancient Mesoamerica. And I got to say, the argument here is bold.
Very bold.
It claims that if you look at the specific military campaigns in the Book of Alma, we're talking ambushes, fortified cities, river crossings, they don't just happen somewhere out in the ether.
No, they fit.
They fit almost exactly like a puzzle piece right into the geography of the Chontalpa River Basin and the Isthmus of Tehuantepec.
And that is the mission for this deep dive. We aren't just retelling the war stories for you. We are stress testing them against the actual terrain.
Taking the action movie and seeing if the set design makes sense.
Exactly. Does the physical landscape, the swamps, the specific mountain passes, the seasonal floods, does that explain why the wars happened the way they did?
And we have a ton to get through for you today. We're going to talk about ancient fortifications that rely on actual physics, a decoy strategy that only works because of a very specific mountain range, and a mathematical mystery involving the calendar that, honestly, I'm still wrapping my head around.
The calendar part is where the aha moment really lands, I think. But we have to survive the war first.
Fair enough, yeah. Let's start with the board. The source focuses heavily on something called the East Sea strategy.
Right.
Set the scene for us. The Nephites are defending their territory, but they have this massive glaring problem on their eastern flank.
So picture the Nephite lands in your head. To the south and east, you have the Lamanites. Now, the Nephites have a severe vulnerability in the eastern lowlands, a place called the Land of Jershon.
Okay.
Strategically, this is the door to their heartland. If you break through here, you can just sweep right into the north.
So this is a critical military sector. You'd expect them to put their Navy SEALs there, right? Their absolutely best troops.
You'd think so.
But instead, the text says they place the anti-Nephi-Lahis in Jershon. And these are the pacifist converts. The people who literally buried their weapons deep in the earth and swore they would never fight again.
It does seem completely counterintuitive, doesn't it?
Counterintuitive is polite. It sounds like a suicide mission. Here is our absolute weakest border. Let's put the people who refuse to kill anyone right in the path of the invading army. Why would they do that?
The source argues it was a mix of logistics and just pure desperation. The Nephite armies were stretched incredibly thin.
Okay.
They couldn't spare a massive garrison to just sit there, farm the land, and hold the border at the same time. The people of Ammon, the pacifists, provided the logistical support.
Ah, so they were the supply chain.
Exactly. They produced the food and resources so the actual Nephite armies could focus purely on defense. But you are right, it was a massive, massive risk.
And the risk gets even worse, because right next door to the pacifists, you have the Zoramites in a place called Antionum.
Antionum, yes. This is a key location. The text usually frames the Zoramite problem as a religious crisis.
Right, they're building those towers, praying to idols, falling away from the faith.
Right. But our source points out the terrifying military implication that was definitely keeping the Nephite generals up at night.
Because if the Zoramites
Exactly. It wasn't just about saving souls for the generals. If the Zoramites defected to the Lamanites wouldn't just gain more soldiers.
What else did they get?
They would gain a fully fortified military base Anchurnum right inside the Nephite defensive perimeter.
Oh, wow.
It would be like the Cold War, and suddenly a key border state flips sides and just invites the enemy to park their tanks in your backyard.
So when the text talks about this great mission work to the Zoramites, it's actually a desperate diplomatic mission to prevent a total strategic collapse.
Precisely. It is high-stakes geopolitics.
Yeah.
And this brings us to a concept the source spends a lot of time on, which I think is misunderstood by almost everyone who reads the text, and that is the definition of wilderness.
Yeah, because when I read wilderness, I picture trees, forests, Bambi. Nobody living there.
That is a very modern, very Western view of the word. But the source argues that in this Mesoamerican context, wilderness didn't mean empty land at all.
Then what was it?
It meant land that hadn't been civilized or terraformed by the Nephites specifically. It was land that was full of people, specifically Lamanites.
So it's more of a political or cultural designation, kind of like the old Roman concept of barbarian lands?
That is a perfect analogy. The Romans called it barbarian, the Nephites called it wilderness. The source identifies a specific cultural line running right through the east central area, which is modern-day Tabasco and Chiapas.
Okay.
It's actually a linguistic boundary. On one side, you have Mixozoic speakers.
Which correlates to the Nephite sphere.
Right. Think of the Mixozoic lands as the Nephite cultural zone. Then you cross a line, which is often a river, and suddenly you are in Mayan-speaking territory. That represents the Lamanite sphere.
And the Grijalva River acts as this frontier.
It does. The source identifies the Grijalva as the river Sidon mentioned in the text, and this changes how we see those East Sea borders. This area, known as the Chontalpa, isn't just a quiet forest.
What's the terrain actually like?
It is flat, wet, and incredibly swampy. It is a massive labyrinth of water and mud.
The source mentions that travel was severely limited to specific trails because of the swamps. You couldn't just march an army anywhere you wanted in a straight line.
No, absolutely not. If you leave the high ground or the beach dunes, you are wading waist-deep in muck. This dictates all the military strategy. You have to control the passes and the dry ridges. If you lose those, your army loses all mobility.
Which totally shifts how you read the battles. You're fighting for a dry strip of dirt. This brings us to the archaeological parallels, which are frankly a little spooky.
They really are.
Because the text mentions a city of Moroni located right on the coast. And it meets a very specific, dramatic fate.
It does. The text says that the city of Moroni eventually sank into the depths of the sea.
Now, skeptical me reads that and says, okay, cities don't just sink. That sounds like an Atlantis myth. But the source points to a specific spot on the map, right?
It points to the Chontalpa coast, specifically an area near Laguna Mecocan. And here is the reality of that geography. It is built on highly unstable, alluvial soil.
Oh, I see.
We find actual archaeological sites there today, like Tupilco, that have literally been washed into the sea by violent storms and shifting coastlines.
So it's not a magic spell that sank the city. It's a massive hurricane or a sudden shift in the river delta.
Exactly. The real-world geography matches a place uniquely vulnerable to rapid inundation. But if we really want to talk about matches, we have to talk about the city of Mulek.
Right, because the source claims the city of Mulek is actually the famous Olmec site, Venta. Now, I have seen pictures of Venta, the huge stone heads, very ancient. But Venta is Olmec. The Book of Mormon is, well, later than that.
Well, the timeline is interesting. Venta collapses as a major Olmec capital, but the people didn't just vanish into thin air. The site remained. And geographically, Venta sits on a rise, basically an island, completely surrounded by those Chontalpa swamps we just talked about.
Which perfectly explains the military strategy described in the text.
Right. The text describes Mulek as a stronghold where armies could hole up and refuse to come out to fight on the plains.
Because they didn't have to.
Exactly. If you are on an island in a swamp, you are naturally fortified. You can just force the enemy to come to you through miles of mud. It's a defender's dream. But the detail that really caught my eye in the source was Stela 3.
Yes, the carving. Describe this for us.
It's a massive stone carving found right at Venta. It shows two figures facing each other. One has features typical of the local area, likely Olmec or Mixoc. But the other figure, he really stands out.
The source mentions the nickname archaeologists actually gave him, Uncle Sam, which I have to admit sounds a little ridiculous for an ancient Mesoamerican artifact.
It is a tongue-in-cheek nickname, sure, but look at the features they're describing. In a region and an artistic tradition where men are almost always depicted with smooth faces, this figure has a striking flowing beard.
And a different facial structure.
Right. He has a prominent, high-bridged, beaked nose. He looks remarkably Near Eastern.
And the dating on this stone?
The monument dates to the 6th century BC.
Which is exactly when Mulek, who the text says was a son of the Jewish king Zedekiah, would have arrived from Jerusalem.
The correlation is very difficult to ignore. The source suggests this carving could depict a treaty or a historic meeting between a Mulekite leader, someone with that Semitic look, and a local survivor of the Olmec collapse.
That anchors the text in a real place and time.
It really does. It suggests these populations were interacting and mixing right from the start.
That puts a face on the history for you. literally. But let's get back to the fighting. If you are Captain Moroni and you are dealing with these swamps and river lines, how do you actually defend yourself? The text talks a lot about ditches and banks.
It does. And for a long time, readers and even some scholars just imagined these were simple dirt mounds, of maybe waist high, something you could just jump over.
Right, little trench.
But if we look at a site called Bacon in the Yucatan, we see what Moroni was likely building. Bacon has a defensive system that includes a ditch and a bank that creates a 35-foot vertical barrier.
25 feet. That's a 3-story building.
Yes. And the source explains the physics of it perfectly. Imagine you are an attacking Lamanite soldier. You run up to this fortification. First, you have to scramble down into a deep ditch.
Right.
Now you're standing at the absolute bottom, looking up at a sheer wall of packed earth 3 stories high.
And the defenders are waiting on top.
Exactly. If you try to throw a stone or shoot an arrow, you are fighting gravity. You have to shoot 35 feet straight up. Your range is destroyed, your impact is gone.
While the guys on top are just dropping things on your head.
Right. The defenders are raining down missiles on you with added velocity from the height. It turns the geography into a weapon.
It's an absolute kill zone.
It is highly efficient engineering. And speaking of engineering, the source clears up some long-standing confusion about armor and weapons, too. The text mentions thick clothing that could miraculously stop arrows.
I always pictured, really heavy wool or layers of thick leather. But in a humid Mesoamerican jungle, that sounds like a recipe for heat stroke. You'd die before the battle started.
It would be miserable. You couldn't fight in that. The source identifies this armor as equipilli. It is a quilted cotton armor, about 2 fingers thick. But the secret ingredient wasn't just cotton, it was brine. Salt water.
They souped their shirts in salt.
Yes. They would soak the quilted cotton in heavy brine and let it dry in the sun. When the water evaporates, the salt crystallizes deep inside the fibers.
Oh, wow.
It makes the cotton incredibly tough, almost like a rigid board. It was strong enough to stop an obsidian arrow or a slashing blow, but because it was cotton, it was breathable enough for the tropics.
That is surprisingly high-tech for just thick clothing. Okay, I have to ask about the weapon now. The scimitar.
The scimitar.
Critics have jumped on this word for years. They say scimitars are medieval scimitars, curved metal swords from the Middle East, and those absolutely did not exist in ancient America.
This is where translation gets really tricky. The source argues that scimitar is simply a functional translation for a weapon called the maquahuitl.
The obsidian club.
Yes. It is a flat, hardwood club embedded with razor-sharp obsidian blades all along the edges. Now, strictly speaking, it's not a metal sword.
Right.
But it is a curved weapon that you swing.
And it does damage like a sword.
Honestly, it does worse damage than a sword. The Spanish conquistadors wrote terrified accounts about seeing a maquahuitl cut the head completely off a horse in a single blow.
A horse? That's terrifying.
It creates a jagged, horrific wound. So if Joseph Smith, or whoever translated the text, saw a vision of a curved weapon hacking off limbs, scimitar might have been the only word in their English vocabulary that fit the action, even if the material was wood and volcanic glass, not steel.
That's a really helpful distinction for you as a reader.
Yeah.
Focus on the function, what the weapon actually does, not just the English label.
Exactly.
Now, I want to slide the map over a bit. We've been in the swampy east. Let's talk about the southern front.
This is the area the text calls the Western Wilderness, which the source identifies with the Sierra Madre Mountains.
Okay, totally different terrain.
Entirely different. These are rugged, extremely high peaks that completely block the coast from the interior valleys.
And this is the setting for the famous story of the stripling warriors, the 2,000 young sons of Helaman.
Right. And to truly appreciate their battle, you have to understand a geographic feature called the Motozintla Pass.
Motozintla.
It's a specific geological bottleneck. There is really only one main pass that connects the interior valleys to the Pacific coast in this entire region. If you control this pass, you control the flow of armies.
Okay.
The Lamanites had captured a city called Manti, which the source suggests sits right at the head of this pass.
So they have the high ground, they control the door. So Helaman is trying to lure them out. He uses a decoy strategy.
Yes. He takes his small force of 2,000 young men and marches them right past the Lamanite stronghold, acting as if they are heading to a city beyond which the source identifies likely as the pilgrimage center of Izapa.
It's a total bait and switch. Hey, look at us. We're a small, vulnerable army just marching by.
And the Lamanites take the bait. They come pouring out of their fortress to chase them down. Now, here is where the terrain creates the real drama.
Right.
The source describes the chase happening through the wilderness. In the Sierra Madre, this likely means they are running along the flattish tops of the mountain ridges right through pine and oak forests.
Wait, why the ridges? Why not just run down into the valleys where it's flatter?
Visibility and speed. If they went down into the canyons, they would lose sight of the enemy. They would risk being boxed in or ambushed from above.
That makes sense.
They had to stay high to keep moving fast and keep an eye on the pursuit. So picture this in your mind. These 2,000 young men running for their lives along the absolute spine of these mountains, likely at very high altitude.
Oh, man, just lung-burning exhaustion.
And it's a high-stakes game of chicken. They have to run slow enough to keep the Lamanites chasing them, but fast enough not to get caught and slaughtered.
It adds such a physical, visceral layer to the story. You completely miss that tension if you just think they were lightly jogging across a flat, grassy field.
You can almost feel the elevation just reading about the terrain.
Okay, eventually the major wars die down, and the text says people started moving north. This is the Haygoth section of the source.
Right. Around 60 BC, there is a massive push northward. Haygoth is the famous shipbuilder mentioned in the text who takes huge groups of people away in ships.
And everyone always asks, and I mean everyone, did Haygoth go to Polynesia? I feel like that is a classic Sunday school answer you hear growing up.
It is a very, very popular tradition, but our source plays the role of the calm voice of reason here.
Pop in the balloon.
A little bit. It explicitly states that while there are interesting cultural parallels, there is effectively zero hard archaeological evidence to connect Haygoth to Polynesia. The source suggests we need to look closer to home.
So where did he actually go?
Well, the shipyards were likely located on the Pacific side of the Isthmus of Tehuantepec.
Why build them there?
Because there are large, calm lagoons there, perfect for launching big vessels. And crucially, they had access to dense timber in the nearby hills, which is actually really rare on that specific stretch of coast.
So they build the ships. Where do they sail?
The suggestion is that they sailed north along the Mexican coast, perhaps heading towards the Valley of Mexico.
Like the Teotihuacan area.
Possibly. The timing aligns beautifully with the rapid rise of Teotihuacan. It suggests a major migration from the Maya regions up into central Mexico.
Oh, so it's coastal migration.
Right. It's a migration within Mesoamerica, utilizing the ocean for speed rather than a vast voyage across the open Pacific.
It seems like every single time we look at this text through a modern lens, whether it's wilderness meaning trees or shipping meaning crossing the Pacific Ocean, we miss the actual picture.
We project our world onto theirs.
We do. And the source argues this happens with time, too, not just space. There is a massive chronological error that has bothered historians reading this text for decades.
Ah, yes. The 600-year problem. This is a classic example of what we're talking about.
Walk us through the math on this. What is the actual discrepancy?
Okay, so the Book of Mormon prophesies very clearly that the Messiah would be born exactly 600 years after Lehi left Jerusalem.
Okay.
We know from the Bible and historical records that Lehi left in the first year of King Zedekiah's reign, which history tells us is 597 BC.
Okay, pulling out the mental calculator for you listening. 597 BC minus 600 years. That puts the birth of Christ at roughly 3 or 4 AD.
Right. But historians and theologians generally agree that the historical Jesus was actually born around 4 BC, just before the death of Herod the Great.
So the ancient prophecy is off. It's off by about 7 or 8 years.
In our modern Gregorian calendar, yes, it's off. And for a long time, critics pointed to this and said, see, Joseph Smith just got the math wrong when he wrote it. But remember exactly where we are geographically. We are in Mesoamerica.
And they do not use the Gregorian calendar.
No, they didn't. The Maya and other major Mesoamerican cultures use a unit of time called the ton. A ton is not 365 days.
What is it?
It is exactly 360 days. It was the absolute standard unit for all their historical and long count calculations.
Wait, so what happens if you take that 600 years prophecy and calculate it using their ton years?
Let's do the math properly. 600 ton years times 360 days equals 216,000 days total.
Okay.
If you take 216,000 days and convert that back into our standard solar years, so dividing by 365.24.
It equals?
It equals roughly 591.8 solar years. Let's just call it 592 years.
Hold on. So 597 BC minus 592 years.
Puts you almost exactly at 5 or 4 BC, the generally accepted, historically accurate date for the birth of Christ.
That is insanely precise.
It is remarkably precise. It fits like a glove.
But hold on, the implications of this, the so what here is huge. This implies that the Nephite record keepers, these guys who were supposedly writing in Reformed Egyptian or whatever, had completely adopted the local Mesoamerican way of measuring time.
Exactly. This is the smoking gun of deep cultural assimilation. It tells us that while they might have kept their core religion and their lineage history, they had essentially gone native in their daily timekeeping.
Right. They were thinking in tons, even when they were referencing ancient Hebrew prophecies from their ancestors. It suggests a level of day-to-day cultural integration that we really don't usually attribute to them.
It entirely flips the script. It changes the text from being historically inaccurate to being culturally accurate in a highly specific way that a guy in 19th century New York couldn't have possibly guessed.
It really does.
Yeah.
And since we are talking about time and calendars, there's one final note from the source on warfare that ties all this back together. The death of Amalickiah.
Right, the ultimate villain of the text. The king of the Lamanites.
He was assassinated in his tent by Teancum on New Year's Eve.
Which makes for a great dramatic story. It's highly cinematic. The hero sneaking in on the last night of the year.
But in Mesoamerica, it is way more than just drama. It is cosmology. In the ancient Mesoamerican worldview, the transition between years, especially the 5 useless days at the end of the calendar year, was a time of immense cosmic danger.
Useless days. Yes, days that didn't fit neatly into the cycles. They believed the veil between order and utter chaos was terrifyingly thin during this transition.
So waking up on New Year's Day to find your king dead.
It wasn't just a severe military setback, it was a catastrophic cosmic omen. It meant the entire universe was suddenly against you. It meant the gods had abandoned your army for the entire coming cycle.
Wow, this completely explains the Lamanite reaction in the text. The book says they woke up, saw he was dead, and just immediately retreated. They outright refused to fight. I always read that and thought, you still have the way bigger army. Why are you running away from one assassin?
They weren't just scared of the Nephites anymore. They were terrified of the universe. They firmly believed the new year was cursed before the sun even fully rose.
So bringing this all together, what does this all mean for you listening? We've looked at swamps, sinking cities, mountain ridges, physics-based forts, and 360-day ton years.
For me, the grand synthesis of this source is that geography dictates destiny. You truly cannot understand the desperate choices made by Captain Moroni or Helaman without understanding the suffocating swamps of the Chontalpa or the strategic bottleneck of the Sierra Madre passes. The land itself is a main character in the story.
And what about the calendar piece?
It teaches us to be humble with our assumptions. What looks like a glaring mistake from our 21st century Western perspective, like the 600-year count being off, might actually be the strongest evidence of cultural authenticity we have once we just look through the correct historical lens.
It really forces you to stop reading the text like a modern fantasy novel and start reading it like a grounded ancient artifact.
It does, and it raises a provocative thought to leave on. We talked earlier about wilderness not being empty land, but just uncivilized from the specific Nephite perspective.
Right, the people who didn't fit their mold.
Exactly. It makes you wonder how much of the history we read, really any history, is defined simply by who draws the map and who gets to decide what civilization looks like.
If wilderness is just what the mapmaker doesn't control, how much of history is just PR for the guys with the ink? That is a heavy thought to leave on. The map is not the territory, as they say. Thank you for walking us through this. It definitely changes how I'll picture these chapters next time I read them.
My pleasure.
And thank you for listening. Go look up a map of Tabasco, find that river, and see if you can spot the defensive lines for yourself. We'll see you on the next deep dive.